10 years before Breaking Bad premiered in 2008, Walter White of Bessemer, Alabama, was already building a meth empire, and the drug was becoming an epidemic nationwide. In the last 10 years, before the Mexican cartels dominated the meth market, there was someone who took over the streets on his own. The guy who allegedly inspired one of the biggest shows in TV history, the real Walter White, the pioneer of the shake and bake method who single-handedly skyrocketed drug use in the Bible Belt. He took foreclosed houses and broke down empty train stations as his meth labs, but that didn't stop him from becoming the biggest meth cook in the South. But the drug empire that took years to build would quickly crumble, all because of a partner's betrayal. From a random construction worker to the Walter White. This is the curious story of the real-life Walter White. Walter Eddie White was born in McCalla, Alabama, in a lower-class family in 1957. He grew up as country as it gets, fishing, hunting, driving trucks around town, and a bunch of country activities down in Alabama. White didn't have much growing up. His dad was a part-time construction worker, and his mom stayed at home. But unlike the majority of drug dealers out there, White once described his childhood as beautiful.
Played baseball, Little League, had motorcycles. It was just a good time in my life, and it was just beautiful.
While his dad tried to shelter him from bad influence, Walter White needed to be sheltered from himself. He always wanted to take control. Whether it's a ball game or a silly argument, he'd always made sure he'd finish on top. He would then take matters into his own hands. At 15, he started working his way up construction sites. By 18, he'd become a construction manager, building homes around Alabama. Things stayed pretty much the same for a few years. Walter had a son he named Brandon. He continued working his construction job and did the best he could as a single dad. He started taking jobs outside the state, particularly in Oklahoma. Sometimes he'd stay for a few days at a time. All alone in a different state, Walter got bored on these trips. He started dabbling in recreational drugs as a way to kill time, mainly marijuana though. With his frequent trips to Oklahoma, White became friends with his dealer. What started as late-night hangouts soon became an introduction into the narcotics world. One thing led to the other. Walter White became the student of Oklahoma's biggest meth cook. The identity of this cook remains unknown, as Walter never shared his name with anyone. And there he was. Out of nowhere, Walter had become the assistant cook of Oklahoma's main meth chef. He'd go back and forth between Alabama and Oklahoma. During the day, he'd be building wooden houses. At night, he would help cook the purest crystals in a random backyard cabin in Oklahoma. A couple of years deep into his part-time meth cook job, his construction business started getting a bit slower, and Walter White's trips to Oklahoma were getting fewer every month. For the first time in years, Walter was thinking how he's gonna pay rent next month. But he always knew he had a unique skill, a knowledge only a handful have in America, and that was how to cook the purest meth in the market. In the late 2000s, Walter White began his solo meth cooking journey. This time, his target was the streets of Alabama. A cook was born. It was time to build the Walter White Meth Enterprises. But Walter wasn't the only one building his crime empire. From the time the internet was born, some took it as an opportunity to build cyber crime networks. Today, these cyber gangs have become the norm, and millions have fallen victim to their practices, from robbing bank accounts to stealing identities. That's why a real robust solution is mandatory for a safe internet experience. And that solution is Aura, the sponsor of today's video. If you've ever wondered how scammers get your phone number or why your inbox is flooded with spam, this is why. There are companies called data brokers that sell your data. They do it without your consent, and they make millions selling it to marketers, scammers, and even stalkers. That's why we use Aura. Aura is an all-in-one digital security platform. Their team takes care of the hard part, automatically removing your info from these shady sites. You may already have a digital security tool, but not having Aura is like locking the front door, but leaving the back door open. It also has a built-in VPN with over 100 virtual locations. If anything does happen, Aura includes $5 million in identity theft insurance protection. Stop leaving yourself vulnerable to data breaches. Click the first link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to get a 14-day free trial and see if any of your data has been exposed. Thank you, Aura, for sponsoring this video. As soon as White stepped foot in Alabama, he got busy right away. First, he needs to build his lab. Finding the perfect spot was crucial. He scouted secluded properties, abandoned farmhouses, and dense wooded areas where the chemical odors could dissipate into the vastness of the countryside. His search led him to a backyard cabin on a house he rented in Tuscaloosa County, Alabama. This is real-life footage of Walter White's first meth lab. Setting up the lab was the next step. He needs his chemistry equipment. White knew that even if he asked a licensed chemist to source equipment for him, that would put him at risk of more people finding out. Walter had to make a tough phone call. The plan was to simply ask his former cook teacher back in Oklahoma to get him the equipment. But not just equipment. White needed all the chemicals involved in the process: ephedrine, red phosphorus, iodine, lithium, and a bunch of other dangerous chemicals. His former cooking teacher, later identified as Tomas Alvarado of Turlock, agrees on one condition. White has to stay away from the Oklahoma market, to which he agrees. A few days later, the load of chemicals and equipment arrived. White didn't care how or who got inside his rental house. All he cared about was moving on with the plan. But no king reigns alone. White understood the necessity of a loyal, trustworthy crew. His accomplices were carefully selected. His first partner was someone he said he knew and trusted from back in the day. The identity of this person remains anonymous. The third partner was none other than Walter White's son, Brandon. To stay off the radar, Walter kept a part-time construction job. He also got his son to work part-time at a grocery store. All of that was a deflection to cover their tracks. The crew was finally ready. It was time to cook. Literally. Walter had always kept saying to his son that drug dealing was not in his character. But once he started touching some of that crystal money, he got addicted and found it impossible to stop. White knew the key to him staying out of jail for so long was keeping a low profile and being careful about who he dealt with. He would then spend the next 5 years cooking crystal meth in his backyard cabin. The crew would spend the day working their regular jobs and the evenings cooking meth. With the purest product on the market, White didn't have issues distributing it, and quickly he dominated Alabama and Montana's markets. Some said that he was distributing over 100 pounds of meth every month. Walter White felt invincible. But just like any empire, at some point, the emperor will make a fatal mistake. A simple mistake would destroy an entire drug empire. With time, Walter's son Brandon grew apart from his dad. He always felt like he was just an employee in the business. Whenever Walter gave him instructions on how to go about things, Brandon would always do whatever he felt like doing, especially when it comes to spending the drug money. White had always been low-key and frugal, but his son, being the young reckless that he is, wanted a flashy lifestyle, which would jeopardize the whole operation. One night, during a cooking session, an argument broke out between the father and son. Things escalated quickly. One thing led to the other, and the heated argument resulted in a shootout. Following a disturbance call made by residents nearby, police quickly came on scene. Walter, his son, and the third accomplice tried to get rid of everything: the lab equipment, a whole batch of crystal meth, and a bunch of other incriminating evidence.
Just a shelf on this wall, that one, and part of that wall. And it was just kind of an assembly line. Me and him worked in here. We had a couple of chairs that rolled around. Nothing fancy or high tech. It just whatever it took to get the job done.
But they had too much stuff to hide and didn't have enough time to bury everything. Eventually, police raided the house and the cabin, discovering 32 pounds of meth, $15,000 in cash, and 2 handguns. When the DEA was called on scene, White knew he's going down. A district judge in Billings, Montana, sentenced him to more than 12 years in a federal prison, 9 for a charge of possession with intent to distribute meth, and 3.5 years on a firearms conviction. While Breaking Bad's Walter White celebrated his 52nd birthday during scenes in the final series of the program, at 53, the real-life Walter White can claim at least to have outlived his fictional counterpart.
I would always hear about the meth that used to be there that they got from the guy that we supplied, and they had no idea it was through me, you know. There's several different ways to make it come out different colors, yes. I've seen it blue and pink, purple, yes. When it's white, that's when it's perfect.
To this day, it's still uncertain that the TV series was based on him. But according to Walter, his jail time wasn't as bad as he thought it would be. Subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.